A new record for the state of Florida. Governor DeSantis has signed the 9th death warrant this year, the most for any governor since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. The latest execution set for former Eglin Air Force Base airman Edward Zakrzewski. He's convicted of killing his wife and 2 children. In 1996, Zakvski pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder, receiving 3 death sentences.
He stood in a courtroom and listened as his fate was read aloud. A sentence shaped by years of evidence, appeals, and decisions that could no longer be reversed. Edward James Zakrzewski II was not an ordinary defendant. He had once worn the uniform of the United States Air Force, rising to the rank of technical sergeant, a position built on discipline, trust, and leadership. That kind of life does not collapse overnight. It erodes slowly, quietly, until one moment changes everything. He was 29 years old on June 9, 1994. By the time the day was over, his home had become the center of one of the most disturbing cases in Florida history. More than 3 decades later, on July 31, 2025, the state carried out his execution, marking one of the highest numbers seen in a single year in modern times. But the execution is not where this story begins, and it is not the part that explains what truly happened. To understand that, we have to go back, before the headlines, before the courtroom, before anyone outside that house knew something had gone terribly wrong. This is a case that almost disappeared from national attention, not because it lacked evidence, not because it lacked severity, but because it unfolded at the exact moment the country was looking somewhere else. An entirely different story consumed the public, drawing cameras, headlines, and focus away from a mother and her 2 children whose names should have been everywhere. As we go through this case, there is something important to keep in mind. For 31 years, this man challenged every decision, every ruling, every sentence handed down to him, taking his case through every possible level of the legal system, all the way to the highest court in the country. Every time, the answer came back the same. If you are interested in cases like this, the ones that almost slip through the cracks, make sure you are following this channel. That is exactly what we focus on. Now let us get into what actually happened. Edward James Zakrzewski II was born on January 31, 1965, in Kalamazoo, Michigan. His background, at least on the surface, followed a path that would not raise concern. After a short period in college, he made a decision that many young men make. He enlisted in the United States Air Force. It was a structured life, clear expectations, defined hierarchy, measurable progress, and over time, he adapted to it. He was not someone who struggled within that system. In fact, he advanced. He reached the rank of technical sergeant, a non-commissioned officer position that is not given lightly. It requires consistency, discipline, and the ability to lead others. People above him trusted him. People below him reported to him. That matters because it establishes something important. This was not a man who lacked control. This was not someone drifting through life without direction. By the early 1990s, Zakrzewski had begun building something that looked stable from the outside. He returned to education while continuing his military service, working toward a degree. He was close to finishing. Career in place. Education nearly complete. Family at home. It is the kind of profile that does not attract attention. His wife, Sylvia, had a very different story. She was born in South Korea, and her early life was shaped by expectations that did not always align with the decisions she would later make. Before meeting Zakrzewski, she had been married once before, also to an American serviceman. That relationship ended, and it ended without children. Her family disapproved of that life, and that disapproval followed her. She met Zakrzewski while working at a base exchange store. Their relationship developed quickly. They married after she became pregnant, and she adopted an American name, Sylvia. Together, they had 2 children, a son, Edward, known as Kim within the family, and a daughter, Anna. For a period of time, the family lived in South Korea. Those years, according to later records, were among the closest Sylvia felt to being at peace. But even there were complications. She faced social pressure, criticism, and isolation tied to her marriage and her children. What was supposed to feel like home did not fully become one. In 1992, the family relocated to Florida. A new assignment, a new environment, a new house. They purchased a home in Mariester, a quiet area not far from Eglin Air Force Base. From the outside, it looked like progress, a family settling down, a permanent place. But inside that house, something was shifting. The marriage was deteriorating. Not suddenly, not in one moment, but gradually. Sylvia began speaking about leaving. Not just leaving the relationship, but leaving the country. She wanted to return to South Korea, and she intended to take the children with her. That detail matters because it reframes everything that follows. Before June 9, 1994, there were already signs. Warnings that did not come from speculation, but from direct statements. A neighbor later reported hearing Zakrzewski say, more than once, that he would kill his family before accepting a divorce. He did not say it quietly. He did not say it in passing. He said it clearly. And nothing happened. No report. No intervention. No warning to Sylvia. No escalation to authorities. Those words remained exactly where they were spoken, until after everything had already taken place. By the time investigators would later step inside that house, those statements would take on a different meaning. Not as a possibility, not as anger, but as something that had already been decided. The timeline leading into June 9th reveals something that is difficult to ignore. The night before, June 8th, Zakvski withdrew thousands of dollars from a joint account. That action happened before any documented conversation about divorce on the following day. Before the phone call, before the final escalation. Which means one thing. The decision was not spontaneous. It was already in motion. June 9th, 1994 began like any other day. There was no visible disruption. No behavior that stood out to anyone around him. Zakvski reported to Eglin Air Force Base in uniform, on time, performing his duties as expected. To everyone who saw him that morning, nothing appeared different. Then the phone call came. His 7-year-old son reached him at work. The message was simple, but it carried weight. His mother wanted a divorce. She planned to return to South Korea. She planned to take the children with her. What matters is not just what was said, but what happened after. During his lunch break, Zakvski left the base and went to an army surplus store. He purchased a machete. There was no confusion about its purpose. No alternate explanation. It was a deliberate purchase. From there, he went home. Inside that house, he did not hesitate. He sharpened the blade. He placed a crowbar in the bedroom. He cut a length of rope. 3 separate tools. 3 separate actions. Each one completed before anyone else returned to that house. Then he went back to work. And that detail is critical because it shows control. Every person who interacted with him that afternoon reported the same thing. He was normal. No signs of distress. No visible agitation. No indication of what had already been set in motion. After his shift ended, he did not go home immediately. He went to a bar. He sat down with another man, another veteran, and he asked a question. A question that, at the time, did not stand out. What does it feel like to take a life? It was not treated seriously. It was not reported. It was dismissed as conversation. But later, when that moment was revisited, it became something else entirely. He returned home that evening. What happened next unfolded without warning. There was no argument. No escalation. No visible trigger. He approached Sylvia and attacked her. The assault was immediate, direct. Without hesitation, he moved her into the bedroom. The attack continued. At some point during that sequence, he used the rope he had prepared earlier. Medical testimony later confirmed that she was still alive during that final act. Then he turned his attention to the children. He called them one at a time. There is a detail in the record that matters here. Both children showed signs of defensive movement. They reacted. They tried to protect themselves. That tells you something about awareness, about what they understood in those moments. The sequence that followed was reconstructed through forensic analysis. Positioning, blood patterns, physical evidence. All of it pointed to a controlled environment, confined space, a deliberate progression. Afterward, Zakvski cleaned himself. He changed his clothes. He left the house. He did not flee immediately. Instead, he went back out. He drank. He stayed at a bar for hours. By the time police encountered him later that night, He appeared to be just another person who had consumed too much alcohol. They took his keys, told him to retrieve them in the morning, and left. They had no reason to suspect anything else. The house remained untouched. The next morning, he returned. He entered through a window, changed again, retrieved a spare key, and went back to work. That is not panic. That is continuation. At some point during that day, he left again. He withdrew more money. Then he went to the airport. He boarded a flight to Hawaii. And by the time that plane left the ground, no one was looking for him, because no one knew. The house remained silent for 3 days and no activity. No visitors. No interruption. It was not until June 13th that anyone entered the property and began to understand what had taken place inside. Investigators processed the scene methodically. What they found immediately established direction. Blood evidence, clothing, items left behind that connected directly back to Zakvski. There was no ambiguity about who had been there. But there was one thing missing. Him. His vehicle was gone. No signs of theft. No indication of struggle outside. Just absence. And in the context of everything else, that absence was interpreted correctly. Flight. A warrant was issued. Law enforcement escalated quickly. The FBI became involved. Federal resources were deployed. Contacts were traced. Family locations monitored. Every known connection was checked. Nothing came back. He had disappeared. And then something else happened. Something that had nothing to do with this case, but everything to do with how it was perceived. Another story took over the country. A different case. A different suspect. A televised event that captured national attention. Millions of people watching in real time. Media coverage that consumed every major outlet. And while that was happening, this case was pushed out of view. It did not disappear because it lacked severity. It disappeared because attention moved elsewhere. Meanwhile, Zakvski was in Hawaii. He chose that location for a reason. No connections. No history. No traceable network. He moved between islands. Used an alias. Integrated into a small community. Worked. Lived in proximity to people who had no reason to question him. For months, it worked. Until one moment changed it. A television program aired. A segment featuring wanted individuals. His image appeared briefly. Not as a headline. Not as a primary focus. Just one face among others. But it was enough. Someone recognized him. Not with certainty. Not immediately, but enough to question. The next day he was gone. And shortly after, he walked into a police station and identified himself. The search ended there. He was returned to Florida. Charged. Processed. And the legal system took over. The trial did not revolve around uncertainty. The evidence was structured, sequential, supported by physical findings and timeline consistency. The defense focused on mitigation, background, character, circumstance. The prosecution focused on preparation, planning, control. The jury reached a decision, and the outcome extended beyond that moment, because it did not end with sentencing. For years, the case moved through appeals, multiple levels, multiple courts, each one reviewing the same record, each one reaching the same conclusion, until there were no more levels left. Decades passed. And eventually, the process reached its final point. An execution date was set. And on that day, everything that began in 1994 came to an end. This case leaves behind details that are difficult to ignore. A warning was spoken out loud more than once, and it went unanswered. No report, no intervention, no one stepping in before it was too late. A child made a simple phone call, repeating words he did not fully understand, and that moment became part of a chain of events that could not be undone. Sylvia wanted to return to a place she once called home. She held on to that plan for years. She never made it back. Anna was 5 years old. Her life ended before it had the chance to begin. And while all of this unfolded, the attention of an entire country was fixed somewhere else. A different story took over the headlines, and this one faded into the background before most people even knew it existed. 3 lives almost completely overlooked. There is also a question that remains. A jury could not reach a unanimous decision on one of the counts. A judge stepped in and made that decision instead. Today, that would not be allowed under the same legal system. So what does that mean? Was it justice carried out as intended, or a system operating differently than it would now? That is something only you can decide. Sylvia Zakrzewski, 34 years old. Edward Zakrzewski III, known as Kim, 7 years old. Anna Zakrzewski, 5 years old. 3 names that should not be forgotten. Edward James Zakvski II lived long enough to see every stage of the legal process. Decades passed. Appeals were filed. Decisions were reviewed. And in the end, the outcome remained unchanged. The people connected to this case carried it for years. Investigators, prosecutors, and those who refused to let it disappear completely. That alone says something about its weight. If the story reached you, pass it on. Cases like this rely on attention to stay remembered. And if you want more cases that were pushed out of the spotlight, make sure you are subscribed. That is what this channel is here to do.